but it's really our Congress that has cut and run.
Are people in your district aware of your position on 9/11, on the issue of the government's narrative?
Unfortunately, more people are aware, more or less, of my position on 9/11 than they are anything else, because that's what the media keep coming up with. They sort of dismiss me as a fringe candidate because of my stand on 9/11. Now, it doesn't necessarily work, and we're trying to overcome it and counteract it. But
yeah, it's just
that is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
The Orlando Sentinel endorsed in the primary a candidate with absolutely no qualifications and no experience because they considered me a conspiracy kook because of my stand on 9/11. Now, they misunderstand my stand on 9/11, but nonetheless, that's something I have to overcome.
Were you? I realize we're just 2 weeks from the election, and I think there's been a kind of press in the no pun intended in the major media against the 9/11. They had the South Park show last night or the night before, and they had Jim Fetzer on O'Reilly, and O'Reilly really, it's the first time you've seen Fetzer sort of not come out looking well on Fox News, because he did well a few other times with Hannity and Combs.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking there might be a strategy in that now, right before the election, to sort of get everyone, kind of polarized in a certain way about the 9/11.
Of course.
So I guess we really maybe have to not depend upon the major media. I don't know how it could be done. That's why I say we have to kind of think outside of the box. And so I know I'm taking up your time, and you need to write your newsletter. But I had a few more questions about the 9/11 issue, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. You said that there's more evidence against the government than against Osama Bin Laden. And in other words, from a logical standpoint, like you said, or like I mentioned before, it looks like the government is really the number one suspect. So why is it that most people don't understand that? Why do you think it is that most people just don't see the logic of that?
Well, we were told all along it was Osama Bin Laden, but it's the FBI that says they don't have any hard evidence on him. It's the FBI that has refused to list 9/11 on Osama's rap sheet. They say, well, he's not wanted for 9/11 because we have no hard evidence against him. Now, the government is a giant bureaucracy with a zillion people in it, the vast majority of whom are good people trying to work hard for this country. But is there a possibility that there are a few rogue elements in our government that could be involved in 9/11? Yes, I think that's a possibility. And there is certainly evidence that there has been a cover-up. The government has hid evidence. They have put out this 9/11 Commission report, which has obvious falsehoods in it, and even Kane and Hamilton admit that now, that they were lied to and that those lies got into their final report. But, who is really responsible, we don't know. That's why we need a new and truly independent investigation. We can't say that well, it's this person or that person. I mean, do you think George W. Bush himself was involved in planning the attacks? You know, I rather doubt it. But you know, if there, we don't even know if there really were 19 Arab hijackers. But if there were they patsies or were they real hijackers? And if they were real hijackers, how on earth did they succeed against all our intelligence agencies and our interceptors, our air defense system? We know part of the answer is the enormous confusion caused that morning by all of the exercises being conducted. Unprecedented exercises simulating exactly the thing that was happening in real life. And so the question is, did those hijackers, if they existed, have a mole on the inside of the government that could tell them when these exercises were going to happen so that they could do their thing on that day? Or were the exercises specifically planned by people in the government to cover the hijackers and what they were doing? We really don't know. We know that there's been a cover-up and evidence confiscated and all of that. And what are they trying to hide? Are they trying to hide guilt or incompetence? And we don't know. But we should know. Either way, the American people deserve to know.
I know a lot of times when people are arguing against the idea that the government was complicit, like for instance last night on O'Reilly, he said, do you really think, he said to James Fetzer, do you really think that if this was really a story that the whole media would not be on top of it, that the media, international media would not be on top of it? And I think because Fetzer didn't have a ready answer, because I think people really haven't discussed the psychological issues involved, that, yeah, the media really isn't doing their job.
Right.
The media is really, in a way also colluding. And I think the same kind of dynamics come out when somebody says, well, I know that couldn't be the case because it would have had to have been such a large conspiracy. Too many people would have known, someone would have spoken, and that's their logic, that even though all these other facts point to something else and you can't really reconcile those two things, they still go with the idea that it's impossible because it's just too big, it's just too outrageous for most people to accept. I think it's like that idea of the big lie. So I remember at the time when I was young, I'm old enough to know the Kennedy assassination, and talk that went on at that time, and I remember that was the argument at that time. Well, too many people would have been involved. Well, maybe too many people are involved. I mean, it seems that do you really think there's only a small number of rogue elements that could have done that?
Oh, I think so. I think it's possible that the number of people who really knew what was happening, that number was very small indeed, and perhaps fewer than the 19 hijackers. I mean, there's a possibility that they were involved thinking they were part of a counterterrorism exercise because they were, according to reports I've seen, working for and trained by the CIA, and so they could very well have been thinking they were doing something else.
Yeah, but then afterwards, wouldn't they realize, and wouldn't they realize it couldn't have been a coincidence, and wouldn't they speak out?
Well, of course, the 19 hijackers afterwards were dead. But
I'm talking about the people.
There have been people who were involved in that they witnessed some of what went on, and as a matter of fact, they have spoken out, in spite of all the pressure not to. We had a sergeant a couple of weeks ago speak out who was in a command post in Florida and heard a NORAD colonel explain why there were no interceptors by saying, we've been ordered to stand down.
But I mean, if in fact there was an order to stand down, a lot more people than that one, than that one, I think you said Lieutenant Colonel would be aware. So in that case, yeah, you do have a larger conspiracy. And then if you have the media not speaking out or really bringing up any of these questions, then you also have a giant number of people in the media who are involved. Isn't that true?
Well, it depends on what you mean by involved, but I think that there is an awful lot of self-censorship going on. People in the media understand the financial incentives of the companies that they work for. And, every once in a while you get somebody who is brave and speaks out against the grain. But sometimes they get fired, like Bob Scheer was fired from the L.A. Times, one of the best reporters in the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that in some level, maybe people are, on a subconscious level, maybe the public even colludes by not investigating it, because inside they might feel they have a vested interest in having these wars to protect, their lifestyle or something. Do you think that's plausible?
Well, yes, there are a lot of people out there that somehow feel that these wars are good for them, and they don't think about how bad they are for the soldiers fighting them and how bad they are for the Iraqi people and the Afghan people, and they just don't want to believe. It would be just too horrible for them to believe that this was all done for financial gain and had nothing to do with our national security.
Mm-hmm. So for you, I understand you're involved with you're official in the church and the Independent Catholic Church. So does this have something to do with also with your faith, with your desire to make a better world or to help people?
Well, of course, but on the other hand, you don't have to be a Christian or religious at all to want to help people and make a better world. I've got a lot of atheist friends who also want to do that. I don't think we church folks have a monopoly on being good. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of churchy folks who are behind a great deal of the evil going on in the world, I'm afraid.
So also, I looked at the your profile, your history, whatever, and you were also involved with nuclear engineering.
Yes, yes. My degree from Caltech, my PhD is in aeronautics and nuclear engineering.
Did it ever occur to you that the building, the towers, it doesn't look like a gravity collapse?
Well, it certainly looks to me like some kind of a controlled demolition, but that's not a field I'm an expert in. I try not to come to any conclusions about things I really don't know about. But
so, in other words, it doesn't look on its face as though it was explosions.
What kind of explosion?
Well, I'm not certain either, because I'm also not in a position to say. But I do know that just to me, on its face, it looks like the top of the building explodes. And it looks like the building comes down too quickly to be a gravity collapse. But, I just wondered if it looked that way to you. I mean, I think the pictures themselves sort of tell that story.
Well, let me put it this way. I was extremely surprised when those buildings collapsed, because I don't believe it's possible for those aircraft strikes and those modest fires that were involved to bring down those buildings. I just don't think that's possible at all. And I think there must have been something else involved. That's one of the strange things. Why did they collapse?
Well, in that case, do you think that it necessarily? Do you think that the fact that it looks like it might have been a large conspiracy, does that actually negate the fact that it looks like that's what happened? Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, no, it could be a very small conspiracy. I mean, for example, why did World Trade Center 7 come down? It wasn't even struck by an aircraft. And that certainly looks to me like a controlled demolition. I don't know that it was, but if it was, and the video of it certainly looks like it was, if it was,